The officer thought he was enforcing the rules, until the man he confronted revealed a truth that shook everyone watching. Stay with me, because what happened next is a lesson none of us will ever forget. And before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Black Inside 2.0 for more powerful life stories. The sun was just beginning to dip, painting the sky in worn gold as the neighborhood settled into its usual evening calm. Families were returning from work, sprinklers hissed softly over trimmed lawns, and birds circled lazily above the tall palm trees that lined the driveways. But on this particular day, the quiet didn't last. A deep rumble echoed through the gated community, steady, powerful, unmistakable. The sound of a motorcycle with an engine that sang confidence, discipline, and history. The neighbors turned their heads, surprised. Motorcycles weren't common here, not because they were unwelcome, but because the residents usually preferred silent electric cars and polished sedans. The bike rolled smoothly toward one of the largest homes in the area, stopping gracefully in front of the wide entrance. The rider swung his leg off, removed his gloves, and took in a slow breath. Tall, calm, composed, wearing a leather vest that hinted at a man who understood discipline, strength, and responsibility. Behind him, two women stood near the doorway, one in a flowing blue dress, the other in a black jacket. Their expressions said everything: shock, worry, and something else, something like fear for him, though they didn't seem afraid of him. Just then, a police cruiser pulled up sharply, tires screeching more than necessary. An officer jumped out, stern, agitated, rushing without taking a moment to observe the situation calmly. His eyes locked onto the motorcycle, and then onto the rider. "You can't park this here," the officer declared loudly, pointing a firm finger at the bike. The rider didn't flinch. He simply turned his head and offered a quiet, respectful reply. "I live here," but the officer didn't believe him. He didn't ask questions, he didn't verify anything, and he didn't notice the worried faces of the two women who knew things were about to go too far. Instead, he circled the motorcycle tensely, shaking his head. "This vehicle is not allowed in this zone," he insisted. "It breaks the community guidelines. You should know the rules." The rider nodded slowly. "I know them better than you think." But again, the officer didn't pause to understand. Instead, in a moment the neighborhood would never forget, he grabbed a small fuel canister from his cruiser. The women gasped and stepped back instinctively. The rider took a single step forward. "Officer," he said, calmly but firmly, "you don't want to do that." But the officer, fueled by assumption rather than information, splashed the fuel over the bike. The flame sparked quickly, too quickly, rising into a bright burst. The motorcycle ignited. Neighbors stopped in their tracks. The women cried out. The rider stared silently as the flames climbed higher. And the officer, still unaware of the truth, began lecturing him loudly about rules, regulations, and community standards. The rider remained still, still as stone, still as a man who had faced bigger battles than this, still as someone who knew the moment wasn't about anger, but about revelation, because the officer had no idea. The man he was reprimanding wasn't a random biker. He wasn't a visitor. He wasn't a troublemaker ignoring rules. He was the newly appointed chief judge of the entire region, the highest authority in every legal matter for miles around. And he lived, right here, in the house behind him. The moment of truth. The flames crackled loudly for a moment before the rider finally lifted his eyes to meet the officers. "I asked you to stop," he said softly, "not because I feared losing the bike, but because of what this moment means." The officer scoffed. "What it means? It means follow the rules." The rider exhaled slowly. "All right," he said, "then let's talk about rules." The women exchanged glances. They had seen him step into this energy before. Not angry, not aggressive, just focused, the way he became before delivering a life-changing verdict in a courtroom. Neighbors emerged from their homes now, drawn by the flames and the confrontation. Foams came out, whispers spread, but through it all, the rider stood patiently. "Officer," he said again, "did you verify ownership before taking action?" "No," the officer answered quickly. "Did you check my ID?" "No." "Did you ask for clarification before escalating?" "No." "Did I threaten you, refuse cooperation, raise my voice?" The officer hesitated. "Number." "And yet," the rider said gently, "you set fire to what belonged to me." The officer crossed his arms, insisting, "You're making this sound dramatic." "The community rules are clear." The rider nodded. "They are." He reached into his pocket and produced a sleek identification case. He flipped it open. The officer's eyes widened, his posture stiffened, his face paled, the golden emblem gleamed in the fading sunlight, unmistakable and authoritative. The rider spoke with calm clarity. "I am Chief Judge Malachi Turner, newly sworn in. This is my home, that is my driveway, and that," he gestured toward the burning motorcycle, "was my property." Silence dropped over the entire neighborhood. The officer's mouth opened, then closed. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. The two women behind the judge stepped forward now, finally willing to intervene. "Judge Turner tried to tell you," the woman in the blue dress said gently. "But you didn't listen," added the woman in the jacket. The officer finally stammered, I didn't know." Judge Turner raised a hand softly. "I understand, and that's the problem." The lesson begins. With the flames still rising beside them, Judge Turner began walking toward the officer, not threateningly, but thoughtfully, as if each step carried the weight of a story much bigger than the moment. "Do you know what my role as Chief Judge demands?" he asked. The officer swallowed. "Upholding justice." "Yes," Turner replied. "Justice, fairness, respect, not just in courtrooms, but everywhere." He looked at the burning motorcycle, years of memories melting away in the fire. "Do you know why I rode this bike?" he continued. The officer shook his head silently. "Because it keeps me grounded. It reminds me of the days before the title, before the respect, before the robe. It reminds me of where I came from." The neighbors listened carefully. "But today," he added, "you looked at me and saw a stereotype instead of a resident. You saw a rule instead of a person." The officer's eyes lowered. Judge Turner's voice remained steady, not harsh, not bitter, just honest. "We cannot uphold the law by acting first and understanding later." Those words hung in the air like truth suspended by gravity itself. "The neighbors speak." One of the neighbors stepped forward suddenly, a man who had seen the whole thing. "We've lived here for 7 years, he said. "Judge Turner has never caused trouble. He's helped families through difficult times. He's spoken at local schools. He's the reason the community center exists across the street." Another neighbor added, "Your assumptions led to something none of us expected." A third spoke up. "This could have been resolved with one simple question." The officer's face grew heavier with each voice. But Judge Turner remained calm. "This moment isn't about humiliation," he said. "It's about growth." The officer's turn. The officer finally found his voice. "I made a mistake," he said quietly. "A serious one. I acted too quickly. I didn't listen, and I didn't treat you with the respect every resident deserves." Turner nodded. "You have the courage to admit it," he said. "Which means you have the courage to learn from it." The officer clenched his jaw and glanced at the burning bike again. I want to make this right." Judge Turner's eyes softened. "You will," he said. "Not by replacing the bike. Not by writing a report. Not by apologizing to me." The officer looked confused. "Then how?" Judge Turner stepped closer, lowering his voice so it carried more sincerity than authority. "By promising that the next time you face a situation like this, you pause and choose understanding first." The officer nodded slowly. "I promise." And, Judge Turner added, "by treating every person, every resident, every stranger, with the dignity you forgot to give today." "I promise," the officer repeated, more firmly this time. A new beginning. As the last flames flickered out, replaced by smoke curling upward into the dimming sky, Judge Turner reached out and rested a hand gently on the officer's shoulder. "No one is defined by one mistake," he said, "only by how they rise after making it." The officer took a deep, steady breath. "I'll rise better," he said. Judge Turner offered a small, genuine smile. "That's all any of us can do." The women behind him relaxed at last, relieved the moment had unfolded without anger, only truth. Neighbors stepped forward to help, offering support, reassurance, and unity. The officer grabbed a fire extinguisher to finish calming the remaining embers. And Judge Turner, he looked at the charred remains of the motorcycle and whispered to himself. Maybe it was time for a new chapter anyway. This story isn't just about a misunderstanding. It's about listening before acting, respect before assumption, and kindness before conflict. It's about remembering that titles don't define us, but how we treat people does. If stories like this inspire you, don't forget to subscribe to Black Inside 2.0. More emotional, powerful, and life-changing stories are coming your way.